Leadership isn't just changing, it's evolving in ways we're only just beginning to imagine. And women, we're not playing this game anymore. We're the ones reshaping the entire field, building models, movements, and businesses that serve more than just a few. On the She Leads podcast, you'll hear real conversations with women who've broken through all kinds of barriers: revenue, identity, borders, and expectations. There's no sugarcoating here, just the truth, told by those who are living it. I'm Adrienne Garland, entrepreneur, strategist, educator, and creator of live experiences, gathering women leaders together for over a decade. And this is the She Leads podcast. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the She Leads podcast. Today, I am so excited to welcome my next guest. Her name is Katherine Eisold Miller, and she is an attorney, a mediator, an author, and a podcast host whose work focuses on transforming how people experience divorce. She's the founder of the Miller Law Group in New York and is a longtime board member and senior trainer at the Center for Understanding in Conflict, where she teaches professionals how to navigate high-stake disputes with clarity and compassion. Katherine's the host of the Emotionally Savvy Divorce podcast and the author of The Emotionally Savvy Divorce: Smart Negotiations for a Clean Break. Her mission is to bring emotional intelligence into the cultural conversation about divorce so people can end a marriage without losing themselves. She's the past president of the New York Association of Collaborative Professionals and has been featured in the media, including The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, Divorce Magazine, and here on the She Leads podcast. Katherine was also a featured speaker at the She Leads Live conference that took place this past November. So I'm so excited to see her again, and welcome to the She Leads podcast, Katherine.
Thank you, Adrienne. I'm really excited and honored to be here with you.
Well, I am so excited to speak with you today because divorce is a very real reality for so many women. And here on the She Leads podcast, we're super focused on accomplished women that are starting businesses, leading businesses, growing in their professional selves. And this is something that very much comes up for women, and probably at a time where they're either accelerating their business or accelerating through their career. So I wanted to talk to you about all of that. But before we get there, I wanted to give everybody that's listening a little bit about your background and how you became a divorce attorney.
Sure. Well, I went to law school because I was interested in justice, and I realized in the orientation week that was not what law school was going to be about, but I didn't have a plan B, so I thought I'd just stick it out. I
Mhm.
come from a family of therapists, so I always knew that I was interested in the intersection between the law, where it meets people in their personal lives. So some kind of family law or estate planning was always what I wanted to do. And so I got a job outside, right out of law school, pretty much working with families. And after 2 years, I took a mediation training because I was like, wow, there has to be a better way to help these people resolve these cases. And just to give you a sense of the practice that I had at the time as a young lawyer, half of our practice was matrimonial litigation and half was child welfare litigation. In the child welfare arena, I have tried hundreds of cases in front of Judge Judy when she was on the bench. Like that
Oh,
was like kind of like the sense of what it was like to practice law for me as a young lawyer in New York City at the time. So I thought, you know what, there has to be a better way. I'm going to take a mediation training and start to try to integrate these mediative ideas of settling based on each person's own priorities rather than my prediction or the other lawyer's prediction as to how Judge so and so might decide should we end up trying the case. And so, but in every single case, I ran into the same frustration, which was the other lawyer, because we just couldn't get on the same page about what it was that we were going to use to reach a resolution. And you have to understand, Adrienne, that currently nationwide in the United States, 95% of divorcing people settle, meaning they make their own decision before a judge makes a decision after a
Hmm.
trial. So most people were settling, and they still are. In New York, that's 97%. So that's how I'm going to stop my little. I'll let you ask me the next question, but that's sort of how I got into doing what I'm doing.
I am so fascinated with mediation. I actually did some work with a nonprofit organization a couple of years ago called NYSDRA, the New York State Dispute Resolution Association. And they provide mediation training, in all the counties around New York. And there are many other organizations across the United States that provide mediation services as well. But it's just such an incredible skill to have. And I think it's something that people don't even really understand what mediation is versus what a lawyer in, I don't even know what the right terminology, but let's say a professional paying client type of relationship versus mediation services. So before we even go any further, only because I like to educate people so that they truly understand, if let's say they are facing a situation or they even know somebody that's facing a situation of divorce. Can you talk a little bit about what this mediation option is? What is it? What's mediation?
Yeah. Well, mediation is a voluntary process where people agree that they're going to try to work out the issues that need to be resolved. And they do it. And it can feel really, Adrian, like, how could we possibly ever work it out ourselves? We couldn't do it in the kitchen. We couldn't do it at Starbucks. We couldn't do it over dinner. But someone is going to help us do that. And yes, the answer is yes. Someone is going to help you, first of all, identify what needs to be discussed, gather the information that you need in order to make really good decisions, and then walk you through the options. And I just want to say one thing about gathering the information. So there is a lot of external information that anyone needs in any dispute, divorce or anything. You need to know what things are worth. You need to know what the contract says. You need to know what, in the case of divorce, you need to know what the assets are, what the liabilities are, how it is you're paying the bills and what those bills are, right? Just as
Mm,
a straight up place. Like, that's just outside information. But what's really important is the inside information. What
hmm,
is each person's priorities? What's important to them and why? And that does not have to be the same. In fact, it's better if there's some discrepancy there. It gives you more opportunity for reaching a resolution that is more of a win-win. I don't love that expression, but more of a mutually beneficial, creative, proactive resolution rather than a reactive kind of zero sum game. And one of
mm,
the ways in which mediators can interrupt the conflict dynamic between a couple is to observe it and to see what that conflict dynamic is and how it gets stuck. I call that the conflict trap, where
hmm.
we get into these patterns of conflict conversations with people that we are closely related to, right? And whether or not that's marriage
Enmeshed.
relationships. Mesh. That is a great word. That is a perfect word, right? So, like, I have a couple of conflict conversations with my husband where he says something, I say something, he says something, and then the thing that comes into my head to say that I know I'm right. I know you would think I was right. All of the listeners would think I was right. God himself would know that I was right. But I also know that if I say that thing, that we're going to have this exact same conversation we've had millions of times before, and we're both going to walk away from that conversation frustrated and unhappy. And so a
Mm,
mediator can start to see these patterns develop, and it's not immediately obvious, but just interrupt that pattern and try to have a conversation that ends in a different place. It might not be perfect, but it would at least be in a different place. And by encouraging the participants in the mediation to talk about their inside information, not just the outside information. Well, maybe the problem and the way it feels so stuck, it shifts a little bit because now I understand myself better. You understand yourself better. We understand the situation we face better. And now we see it a little differently. And so
mm,
from that seeing it a little bit differently place, there's opportunities that we didn't see before to get through it in a way that feels good or reasonably good, even though I am not going to make this easy. It's not easy, but at least it feels productive in a way where it felt really frustrating before.
Thank you so much for taking the time to kind of break that down. I think it's so important. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, when we talk about entrepreneurship and sort of finding opportunity, it is very much about listening to your customer, right? And things that appear to be what the problems are on the surface are often not the problems. They're the symptoms of the problem. So when you sort of
That is
dive down,
exactly right.
right? Yeah. So you're describing mediation in a divorce context, and I'm thinking, my goodness, this sounds exactly like, what we do when we go out and we talk to customers to try and gain some insight, because that's where the opportunity is. That is where you can come up with a solution to a problem that's truly going to satisfy the person. So there's a lot of parallels there, which is very, very interesting. I love that. So, I'm smiling talking about divorce, and I don't mean to be. I don't mean to get excited about that, but I think
Yeah.
mediation is such a beautiful tool.
I think it is the skills that a mediator has to help people express what it is that there was really going on for them. These are skills that work really everywhere, and they work really well when you're dealing with a customer of any kind because they come and they say, "Well, I want to buy the purple widget." Now we start negotiating about the price of purple widgets instead of really understanding why the purple widget. Like,
Yes.
is it the widget? What the color? Like, what is it you're trying to accomplish with the purple widget? Whatever it is,
Yes.
obviously. And so really to understand the customer before you just necessarily respond to what they say they want, because what they say they want is their conclusion as to what's going to solve their problem, but they might not understand it as well as you do because you might
Mm.
see the business or the widget business better than they do. And so maybe understanding that actually they don't need the widget, they need the what's it, and it needs to be the yellow color because that's gonna actually do a better job. They just only heard about the purple widget, right? And I think that's a really big problem that people make in entrepreneurs make, we make in society all the time is assuming that we're reacting to what someone says instead of really trying to understand what they mean and where they're coming from.
Wow. I mean, I feel like we could end the podcast there because that is like the essence of everything, right? Like, let's just let that settle. And I think maybe a message coming out of this podcast, at least something that I'm taking away right here and right now, is, slow down and listen, truly listen. That is something that I think we don't do as a society, as a whole. I don't think we do a really good job of trying to truly understand somebody else. We're so hyper focused on getting our own needs, satisfied that we don't even see what's in front of us, and that's not a great way to move through life. So I think anybody listening out there to this podcast, let this be your message, or yeah, let this be a sign to you to maybe listen a little bit more. And so much opportunity is there, and I think that's what's incredibly important. You know, it's funny that you mentioned the statistic about how 97% of in New York, 97% of cases end in I'm now blanking, settling. 97% of kids end up settling. And, I also was just sort of looking at some statistics about divorce because in my mind and even growing up, I kept hearing that statistic about, 50% of marriages end in divorce. And it seems to be that that number is declining a little bit, or at least has declined. I saw some recent statistics that it's just under 40%. So I guess that's a good thing that, more people, maybe they're being a little bit more discerning about getting married, waiting a little bit longer. It's resulting in hopefully, fewer divorces. But also something that really stood out to me beyond the fact that maybe we're doing a little bit better when it comes to divorce is that 70% of cases of divorce are brought by women. And when they're college educated women, 90% of divorces are brought by women. And that's according to research from the American Sociological Association. And I was like, wow, women are the ones that are recognizing that, like, hey, this isn't working for me. And I think what's really interesting about this is that women are the ones to say, hey, this isn't working. When they're college educated, they say that even more. But we also see that women aren't necessarily prepared to divorce. So I'd love to sort of talk about that from a couple of different perspectives. So when women are young, before they get married or even, think about it, what are some of the things that they need to do to really prepare themselves and their life, for the potential that one day they may be faced with divorce? That's one thing that I'd like to talk about. And then secondly, for women that, never thought that they were going to get divorced or be in that situation and they didn't prepare themselves, what are some things that they can do today if they're facing the prospect of divorce?
Well, those are 2 big questions. And so let's start with the first one. Would that be okay? Like, the things that I'm gonna say from the young woman question, young woman thinking about getting married, preparing to get married, the things that I'm gonna tell you that will help you, if you're in that position, listener, to sort of prepare yourself for the possibility of divorce are also, in my opinion, things that are gonna make it less likely that you will get divorced.
Love it.
Because I think that one of the things that is really a challenge for a lot of people is talking about money.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people, and as a culture, money means so much more than a way to pay the bills. It's really a way that we measure success and power and compare ourselves to our families of origin, our neighbors, our friends, and each other. And so money is also just a way to pay the bills. And each of us have our own, for lack of a better way of framing this, sort of money personality, things that we appreciate about money, things we worry about money, and if you don't have a conversation with your intended or your spouse about these things, then you are almost guaranteeing yourself that you're going to run into a problem, which is kind of
Mm.
like why I like the idea of a prenuptial agreement. There's a lot of legal reasons I like the idea of that too, but it forces people to talk about money because all marriages end, Adrienne. They end either by death or divorce. They all
Yep.
end, and the law has something to
Mm.
say about what that means. So talking about the end of the marriage is not cynically planning for it to end and therefore creating a harbinger of the future for yourself. You're talking about how you're going to handle money during the marriage and after the marriage and what partnership, what marriage means to you when it comes to money. I think that's a really important conversation. It's probably a lot more important than the dress you choose or the
Yeah.
colors of the napkins at the reception or which caterer or band. And yet, so much more attention often goes to those conversations than the conversation about how we're going to handle money during the marriage.
Hey everyone. So, for years, I've been working with Dr. Kent and sending people in my network his way. He does so much impact work. What do I mean by that? Well, he helps people create books and podcasts and things like that. He even helps with this podcast behind the scenes. Dr. Kent is my thought partner. Anyone listening knows that we all need to do what we can to get our thoughts, opinions, and voices out into the world, and how important it is for women to invest in other women and for women to hire other women. I am all about that, and you all know that. But in this case, I think Dr. Kent is an exception. He's doing something really different via this new program that he's launched called the Genius Discovery Program. So he wants to work with people like me and like you who are impact driven. Dr. Kent has an intensive program that goes for a month. He also has a 3-month program where he figures out where you're headed with your brand, your business, your speaking, and your signature story as a thought leader. I've known Dr. Kent for a long time. So believe me when I say that he has a ton of experience working with people that are looking to make an impact but might not know exactly how to approach that. So if you're interested in talking to him, you can go directly to talktokent.com, or you can send me a DM on Instagram at She Leads Media, or just shoot me an email over at hello@sheleadsmedia.com. Gosh, that's societal programming right there, right? Like women just look pretty and select your dress and leave the money and the number stuff to me as a man. Right? Like that is
Exactly.
a big problem. We need to change that.
It is. And then more and more, just to go back to some of the statistics that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Adrian, anecdotally, because I can't remember where I saw this, but I read a study that said that the happiest people are married men and single women. I think you can think about some of the reasons why that might be. I'm not gonna, sort of try to come up with that, and also that the average woman who chooses to divorce thinks about it for 4 years before she does anything about it. The average man, 10. And those 2 statistics kinda go together, right? And
Wow.
so I think that we also have a disconnect, and I think this is changing generationally between the sort of like Barbie and Ken approach to sort of marriage, where I or the Prince Charming, right? I'm the woman, I'm gonna just be maybe I'll have a career or not have a career, but my husband is going to be responsible for paying the bills and keeping us in its particular style of living and all of that. And
Mhm.
yet, women are becoming much more. I mean, so I'm not saying there's no glass ceiling, but there are
Right.
many, many more relationships now where the woman becomes the primary breadwinner, not having expected to be that from the beginning.
Right. Yeah.
And and yet and there's still the same sense that even if they're making more money, "Well, I should get alimony." All right. And so like or I've done everything in the marriage, including bring home the bacon. So you shouldn't get anything. And I think the one of the reasons that I think that having conversations about money early on really inoculates women from having these sort of wake up calls later on in the marriage is that they haven't just swept this conversation under the bed. This hasn't had just happened to them. They're
Mhm.
really proactively engaged in participating in the money conversation, the money decisions in the family all along, so it doesn't become this all or nothing kind of approach to it.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm really thinking about, back in whatever the 50s we'll go. Women weren't necessarily having careers, and so when they entered into marriage, that conversation probably didn't even need to happen because of the way that society sort of set it up that men were the breadwomen winners, women were going to stay home and, cook the bacon. But it's, bringing values into the marriage conversation. You often align on, values and what you would like your life to be. So in a lot of ways, it's a recent phenomenon that goes beyond, what our morals are, what our values are. And it's like we need to add another element into that conversation, which is, how do we want to live our money life as well? Like, what do we expect our lifestyle is going to be? Not just what the man decides in a heteronormative type of relationship, but what what does whatever the man decides, I'll go along with it. That those that language needs to be there for women, and I think that when I agree with you. Having a conversation or even putting like a prenuptial agreement into place is probably the smart thing to do. But I think because it's sort of wrapped in law and, sort of deciding what happens if something inevitably, doesn't work out. That's the part that's scary. Because you said it before, it's like a harbinger of what's to come. If I talk about this, is it more likely that it's going to happen because I'm planning for the inevitability of divorce. And I think that's why so many people avoid it. And it's almost like we need different language that is not law language so that we can have those more humanistic type of conversations going into a marriage.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, people who have prenups are less likely to get divorced, which is why I
Love it.
said one of the
Yeah.
things that is kind of surprising. I think that I I think that that really does help people talk about it, but here's the thing that I think is really scary. It's not just that we're talking about the possibility of divorce. It's like, what if we get into the money conversation, Adrian, and we disagree? Like,
Ooh,
I think a
yes.
lot of people think about that. But here's the thing. Isn't it better to know that and work it out with professional help rather than just find that out 10 or 15 years in?
Yeah. When you are enmeshed in your
Right.
relationship and then it becomes very difficult to figure out, what those next steps are. I totally and completely agree with you on that. And I think it's very powerful what you said statistically that people that have a prenuptial agreement in place are statistically less likely to get divorced. I think that needs to be a banner that we put up and read. And the question that I had to just something that came to mind, and I don't know if you know this or not, but is there any type of research or whatever that says that men are the ones who are more likely to bring up the prenup conversation, or is it sort of equal that like a woman wants to have that conversation? Like, who is the initiator of that
Yeah.
conversation?
I think that I don't anecdotally, I feel like it's brought up pretty much equally by men and women. I think there's two circumstances that make people bring it up. One is families of wealth. If one or both
Yes.
parties come from a family of wealth, their parents are bringing it up
Yeah.
because they want generational continuation of the family wealth, and they're going to sometimes put some considerable pressure on their child to bring it up.
Yeah.
That can be super uncomfortable because then the child feels caught between their parents and their intended spouse, right? And
Yeah.
that can be really uncomfortable, and mediation can be very helpful for that. And the other is when someone has already built something. They have a lot of money in their 401k. They're anticipating a large inheritance or some kind of inheritance. They have a startup. I mean, do you think that Jeff Bezos might have thought, you know what might be a good idea? I have a germ of an idea, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, a germ of an idea that might be a lottery ticket, and you might want to think about what does that mean for the for future of our relationship. I'm not saying that the business should be off the table because I'm just saying talking about it. What is the
Yeah.
involvement gonna be? What's gonna happen? And getting professional advice on that is really useful, so you're not making assumptions that well, you know the expression, "When you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and me." Like, you're
Yes.
just gonna be wrong.
Yes. Yes. It's well, I know that after this conversation, when or if my sons ever do decide to get married, I am definitely going to be having a conversation with them about, whether they have anything to talk about in a prenup or not. But just to have the conversation because it's a very important element of a relationship. And it's not something that you immediately think of, but it's actually the thing that probably, is one of the key factors in marriages breaking up. Money troubles are real.
Yeah,
So yeah, and
absolutely. Another thing that comes up for people a lot, I think, is disagreements about discipline. But if you've already had a difficult conversation about like working out money, then you can talk about your different perspectives on discipline. It's the same conversation. It's just a different topic, if that makes sense.
yeah. And so, for those people that find themselves in a situation where they are facing divorce and they haven't had this conversation and they don't have a prenup, and they're sort of trying to figure out what's next, and we're talking about this specifically from the woman's point of view because that's who's listening into the She Leads podcast. I know there's some amazing men that are listening in too, but I like to, give the advice to the women. So for the women that are potentially facing this scenario and they haven't had the conversation, they don't have, maybe even access to different financial accounts, or, they just don't even know sort of what to do, what action steps to take. What is some advice that it would be helpful for them?
Yeah. So don't act out of fear. It's not, I'm not saying you shouldn't be afraid that there are scary things. There are. The most important decision that you will make as part of the divorce process that will dictate how you feel about the process, the outcome that you get, and how you feel about yourself going through it is how are you going to make the decisions that need to be made? So again, 95% nationwide, 97% in New York are going to settle. That means you're going to sign a contract that resolves all the issues that need to be there. So you should do some research about what's available. So there is mediation. There is something called collaborative law where people agree, have attorneys and mental health professionals and financial professionals and but agree to stay out of court. There's litigation, which is the other end of the extreme where you give over the decision making to a judge or a jury in some jurisdictions. There's some negotiation. So when you go to talk to professionals, you should ask them about the various processes that are available because picking the best one for your situation is a hugely important choice and flexion point in the divorce process itself. And it is really, really, I cannot stress this more as much as possible, Adrian,
Mhm.
really important because otherwise you're gonna feel like you're on a train you never wanted to be on.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I mean, I definitely know people and, people in my family and everything that have just, been faced with all of these different decisions, and they're getting advice from their lawyer and maybe doing things that they don't necessarily want to be doing because it's going to set them up for some outcome with a judge or something. And it feels like you just give over control and it spins away from you. And and then you're left with like, okay, I guess they know better than me. And again, it's like this disempowering, just you know loop that you can't get yourself out of. So I love the advice of, you can be afraid, but figure out how you're going to make decisions. And, you know, do you have any advice for people? Yes, of course, if they retain an attorney, that person is going to help them as much as possible. But for people that are very happy with an outcome, are there other trusted people that they should talk to in their lives? Like, not a friend that you can, bitch and moan and talk about all the things and cry and, he sucks, but someone that can be really, really helpful to you. What type of person might that be for you? That might not be a professionally trained, divorce attorney.
So I think a friend or a good friend or sibling who is willing to listen to you cry and rant and just share what's going on for you is a really valuable resource. I think you have to be careful of not overusing that person because
Yeah.
that could drive someone away if it feels like that's all they're ever doing month after month is listening to you vent about your spouse or
Situation.
soon-to-be spouse. You need to be careful about that or spread that love around a little bit so that you have other people. I think this is a professional, but I think divorce coaching can be very helpful. It's a lot less
Mm.
expensive than talking to your lawyer about some of this stuff, and it can help you kind of get your head straight about where you want to go with it. talking to
Hmm.
a financial professional or attending seminars on financial planning, some of which can are free, uh, like charitable organizations that are out there to educate women about finances, and so that you can make a strategic plan, financial plan for your post-divorce life and get real about what that really means, or at least see the range of possible, a life could be like this or life could be like that. So I have at least, I think that brings the anxiety down a lot, Adrian. If you're like,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm really like nuts and bolts about this, the worst case scenario is this thing and that's not so bad, or I could live with it, or it's a place where I can start that business I always wanted to, or go back to school and learn something else, or really ramp up my career, whatever that thing is. If you have a better sense of that, I think that is really calming rather than anxiety provoking.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sounds very calming to me is, and so many women that I know, once you put us in like execution mode, right? Like, give me a plan, right? Like, let me make some decisions. There is a certain part of our mind that sort of turns on and we're like, okay, go. Like, if I have to do this, and this, at least I can focus my attention on that instead of just, ending up in a pile of tears on the couch, not knowing what even the next step is. So I absolutely love the advice of, go out and educate yourself and come up with a plan. I never even heard of a divorce coach. So that is something that is new to me. That seems like a really good person to sort of get on your side that can help you at least think through what those steps are, because sometimes when we are in an emotional state it is difficult for us to move into our logical mind. But I absolutely love all of this advice. And one last thing I just want to ask about, because so many of the women that listen to this podcast, they do have their own businesses. And so if they are, in the midst of growing and scaling their business, and then they're faced with a divorce, how does that impact their business, and how can they potentially work through all of this? Because I can imagine that it's such an emotional time and we show up in our businesses. So, how does that often play out for women entrepreneurs?
So listen, if you are a woman entrepreneur and you have your business and you are married or thinking about getting married, you really do have a potential problem. And I don't want to be too alarmist about this, but your business or the appreciation of value in your business is a marital asset, meaning it's subject to distribution as part of a divorce. In New York, very unlikely to be 50-50. But Adrian, I'm imagining you have listeners across the country. There are states in which it would be 50-50. And so having a prenup to protect the value of your business, or having a postnuptial agreement, which is essentially a prenuptial agreement that you sign after you're married to protect your business, makes sense. It
Mm,
makes sense, and it's really good the way that you would have an operating agreement with a partner in your business that says, "If we break up, this is how we're gonna resolve our business," and you have a partner. It's a silent partner in your business because each any married partner in the business has their spouse right there as a not sort of a non has a beneficial interest in the business, and that can be awarded to them at the time. I mean, is it likely to force the sale of the business? Probably not, but it is painful. I'm
mm,
not gonna I don't wanna sugarcoat that. It's
yeah.
painful for men and it's painful for women, and so you really, want to think about that operating agreement around what your business is with regard to the marital relationship. I think that's really good advice for anybody in that circumstance. And you don't think about it, right? You're just like, well, my friend Sally and I are going to start an interior decorating business or a beauty business or whatever. What does it have to do anything? We're just making a few bucks, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not,
It's
it's
an
a little bit
asset.
more complicated than just job. It is an asset, which is a great thing. That's the whole point of being an
Yes.
entrepreneur is you're developing an asset, right?
I love that. And so, Katherine, I'm sorry, I apologize. I literally have been sick since Christmas, and as we're talking, my nose is running and running. So I apologize that I keep sort of touching my face here. Uh, but I just wanted to ask if I know that you practice law in New York. So, do you practice in other states? I just want to, before I ask you to if people want to get in touch with you, I just want to make sure that it's clear like how that all works.
We are in the New York City, Westchester, like Lower New York, and Fairfield County, Connecticut is where
Okay.
our practice area is.
Got it. So if people would like to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Well, they could go to the website, which is www.miller-law.com. There's a ton of resources there. And the podcast, which the Savvy Divorce podcast is under my longstanding podcast, which is divorcedialogues.com. And there's a ton of episodes, divorcedialogues.com, old episodes, hundreds of episodes there where I've interviewed financial professionals, divorce coaches, therapists, people going through a divorce, children of divorce, like anything you could possibly imagine
Mm.
wherever you are.
What an amazing resource. I highly recommend if that's something that, you think you could be facing, please go listen to all of those podcast episodes. And Katherine, I cannot thank you enough for spending so much time here with us today on the She Leads podcast and for all of your incredible advice. I know that you are an advocate for women, you're an advocate for making sure that we are setting ourselves up for a joyful life and that it's super important to just be very transparent about the things that we're facing and we shouldn't feel shame about anything at all. There are definitely a lot of resources, tools, support to sort of get us through anything that we're facing in our lives. So thank you so much for doing the work that you do and helping people just, get past emotionally challenging areas of their life. And thank you for being a guest on the
Thank
She
you.
Leads podcast.
So fun.
Awesome. If this conversation moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, please take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and review. It's not just about boosting the show, it's about amplifying the voices of women entrepreneurs who are leading with vision, building with purpose, and shaping what's next. We need more of these conversations in the world right now, don't you think? And if someone came to mind while you were listening, someone who matters to you, send this episode to them. If there's something on your mind about leadership, legacy, or what's next, I want to hear it. Head to sheleadsmedia.com/voice and leave a voice memo or note. Your insight might just help shape a future episode. Make sure to follow the show and come back next week for more conversations you won't hear anywhere else. Thank you so much for listening. This is the She Leads Podcast Network.